People talk about intimacy like it's purely physical, like it's about technique, timing, or chemistry. But that's not what actually stays with someone. What stays with them is how they felt in the moment, emotionally, psychologically, even existentially, right before intimacy. There's a narrow window where meaning is formed, and most people rush straight through it without realizing what they're giving up. Because when presence, restraint, and intention come together, something shifts. The experience stops being forgettable and starts becoming etched into memory. This isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding human psychology, nervous systems, and attachment. It's about why some moments fade instantly and others echo for years. If you understand that difference, everything about connection changes. When people hear a title like this, they often assume it's about technique, about doing something clever at exactly the right moment, and that assumption is already the problem. Because technique is replaceable, presence is not. Anyone can learn a move. Almost no one learns how Tobe fully there. Right before intimacy, there's a subtle psychological shift that happens. It's the moment where anticipation either collapses into routine or expands into something meaningful. And that shift has very little to do with the body and almost everything to do with the nervous system. What actually affects a man at that moment is not stimulation, but orientation. How his attention, emotions, and sense of self are being held. Presence is not performative. It's not exaggerated eye contact or scripted confidence. Real presence is quiet. It's regulated. It's when someone is so internally grounded that they're not trying to get anything from the moment. They're not rushing toward an outcome. They're not anxiously checking whether they're desired. They're simply there. And that creates an unexpected intensity because most people live in a state of internal fragmentation. Psychologically, humans are hypersensitive to attention, not surface level attention, but embodied attention. We can tell when someone is with us versus when they're thinking 3 steps ahead, when a woman slows down right before intimacy, when she's calm, aware, and emotionally settled. It sends a powerful signal. Nothing is being forced here. And that signal does something profound to the male nervous system. Men spend much of their lives in a state of low-grade pressure. Perform, achieve, lead, provide. Even in intimacy, many men feel a subtle obligation to do something right. Presence disrupts that pressure. It creates a moment where he doesn't feel evaluated or rushed. Instead, he feels seen, and being seen without demand is destabilizing in the best possible way. There's a reason silence can feel more intimate than words. Silence, when it's not awkward, communicates safety. It says, I'm not afraid of this moment. And fearlessness is contagious. When someone holds eye contact without tension, without trying to control the outcome, it invites the other person to drop their armor. That's not seduction in the superficial sense, it's regulation. From a psychological standpoint, this is co-regulation. One nervous system calming another. And when that happens, memory formation intensifies. The brain tags the moment as significant, not because it was dramatic, but because it was stable. Humans don't imprint most deeply on chaos. We imprint on moments where something feels resolved, anchored, meaningful. This is where many people get it wrong. They assume intensity comes from escalation, faster, more, stronger. But intensity actually comes from contrast, from slowing down when everything else expects acceleration, from pausing when momentum is pushing forward. That pause creates a psychological vacuum, and attention rushes in to fill it. Presence also communicates self-respect. When someone isn't in a hurry to be chosen, it signals that they already belong to themselves. That's deeply attractive because it's rare. It suggests an internal structure, a sense of identity that isn't dependent on external validation. And humans are drawn to structure instinctively. It feels safe, it feels solid. Philosophically, this touches on something deeper than attraction. It touches on meaning. We don't remember experiences that feel interchangeable. We remember experiences that feel intentional. Presence is intention made visible. It says, this moment matters enough for me to be fully awake inside it. And that's why emotional presence outlasts physical sensation. Physical sensation peaks and fades quickly. Presence alters the narrative. It changes how the moment is remembered, how it's categorized in the mind. Was this just another experience, or was this a moment of genuine connection? The body forgets quickly. The psyche does not. There's also a kind of courage in presence. To be fully there means accepting uncertainty. It means not knowing exactly how the moment will unfold and being okay with that. That level of comfort with uncertainty is deeply grounding to be around. It communicates confidence without dominance, strength without aggression. This is especially important right before intimacy because vulnerability is at its highest, and vulnerability heightens perception. Everything is amplified, the tone of voice, the pacing, the emotional temperature. Any incongruence becomes obvious. If someone is pretending, it shows. If someone is anxious, it leaks through. Presence aligns the internal and the external, and that alignment feels trustworthy. Trust is not built through reassurance alone. It's built through consistency between what someone says, does, and feels. When a woman is emotionally present, her body language, breath, and attention are all synchronized. That coherence is calming. And calmness, paradoxically, makes desire feel safer to expand. What's often missed is that presence is not passive. It's not withdrawal. It's active awareness. It's choosing to stay rather than escape into distraction or performance. That choice creates depth. And depth is what separates moments that fade from moments that echo from an evolutionary perspective. Humans are wired to bond through shared regulation. When two people align emotionally, it signals compatibility at a very basic level. The brain interprets it as this person is safe to attach to. That doesn't mean attachment happens instantly, but the conditions are created. This is why presence can feel disarming. It removes the usual scripts. There's no game to play against someone who isn't trying to win. And without the game, something more honest has room to emerge. Honesty is risky, but it's also memorable. Presence also shifts power dynamics in a subtle way, not through control, but through stability. The person who is most grounded sets the emotional tone. And when that tone is calm, intentional, and unhurried, it invites respect, not demanded, earned through consistency. Right before intimacy, this matters more than anything else, because that's the moment where meaning is either constructed or lost. A rushed moment communicates disposability, even if unintentionally. A present moment communicates care, even without words. And care doesn't kill desire. It deepens it. It gives it somewhere to land. When someone feels that, when they experience intimacy preceded by genuine presence, it stands out against everything else they've known. Not because it was overwhelming, but because it was real. Real moments are rare, and rarity is what makes them valuable. So if there's one thing to understand here, it's this. The most powerful thing you can bring into that moment isn't your body. It's your state of being. If you're calm, aware, and intentional, the moment carries weight. And weight is what makes experiences linger. Because long after the physical sensations fade, people remember how they were met. They remember whether the moment felt rushed or held. And that memory quietly shapes how they value you and themselves going forward. The question then isn't what to do right before intimacy. It's who you are willing to be in that moment. After presence comes something even more misunderstood, and maybe more important, the coexistence of safety and desire. People tend to think these two things cancel each other out. That if you make someone feel safe, you reduce the spark. And if you create desire, you introduce instability. But psychologically, that's a false dichotomy. In fact, the moments that leave the deepest imprint are the ones where safety and desire are experienced simultaneously. To understand this, you have to step back from romantic cliches and look at how human attachment actually works. At a nervous system level, desire activates arousal. Safety activates trust. Most connections lean too far in one direction. Either there's excitement without grounding, which feels intense but unstable, or there's comfort without charge, which feels secure but flat. What very few people manage to create is both at the same time. Right before intimacy, this balance becomes critical, because that's the moment when defenses are down, expectations are high, and vulnerability is unavoidable. And vulnerability without safety feels like risk. Risk triggers self-protection. When self-protection is active, people may go through the motions physically, but they are psychologically guarded. Nothing truly lands. Safety in this context doesn't mean predictability or passivity. It doesn't mean reassurance through words alone. Safety is conveyed through consistency of behavior, emotional steadiness, and the absence of hidden agendas. It's the feeling that nothing bad will happen if you slow down, if you hesitate, if you show uncertainty. That feeling allows the nervous system to relax just enough for desire to deepen rather than spike and collapse. Desire without safety often burns hot and fast. It feels urgent, compulsive, but it doesn't last because it's driven by anxiety. Safety without desire, on the other hand, feels friendly, even affectionate, but it doesn't create longing. What changes everything is when a man feels wanted without being pressured, and trusted without being controlled. That combination is rare, and rarity matters. When someone experiences it, their brain flags the moment as significant, not because it was dramatic, but because it resolved a tension most people live with constantly, the tension between wanting connection and fearing loss of autonomy. Men, in particular, are rarely allowed to occupy that space. Culturally, they're expected to pursue, initiate, lead. Even in intimate moments, there's often an unspoken expectation that they should be confident, capable, in control. When safety is present, that pressure eases. When desire is present at the same time, the easing of pressure doesn't come at the cost of attraction. Instead, it amplifies it. Psychologically, this is powerful because it creates what's called secure arousal. The body is engaged, but the mind isn't bracing for impact. And when the mind isn't bracing, it's open to experience, open to memory formation, open to attachment. This is why being chosen matters more than being chased. When a man feels desired in a way that doesn't demand performance, it reshapes how he understands intimacy. It stops being something he has to earn moment by moment and starts being something he can participate in fully. Safety also allows authenticity. Without it, people perform versions of themselves they think are acceptable. With it, they risk being real, and real is always more compelling than impressive. When someone senses that they don't need to prove anything to be wanted, something in them settles. That settling creates depth. There's also a philosophical layer here. Desire without safety treats the other person as an object of consumption. Safety without desire treats them as an emotional utility. But when both are present, the other person is encountered as a subject, someone with agency, boundaries, and value. That recognition changes the moral quality of the interaction. It feels meaningful rather than transactional. Meaning is what makes moments last. We remember experiences not because of their intensity alone, but because of the story they tell about who we are and how we relate to others. A moment where someone felt both safe and wanted tells a very specific story. I am valued as I am, and I am desired for who I am. That story is difficult to forget. Safety also has a temporal effect. It slows time. When someone isn't scanning for danger or rejection, they become more present. Sensations are felt more clearly. Emotions register more fully. This makes the experience richer without needing to escalate anything externally. Importantly, safety doesn't come from over-explaining or constant reassurance. In fact, too much reassurance often signals insecurity. Safety comes from congruence, from saying less and meaning more, from actions aligning with tone, timing, and attention. When someone's internal state is calm, their presence communicates that calm effortlessly. Desire, in this balanced form, isn't aggressive. It's intentional. It's conveyed through attention, choice, and restraint. It says, I want this, but I'm not desperate for it. That distinction matters because desperation erodes safety, while intention strengthens it. This balance also protects against regret. When safety is present, people don't feel rushed into something they weren't ready for. When desire is present, they don't feel like they compromise their own wants. The experience integrates rather than fractures. Integration is what allows people to look back without dissonance. From a long-term perspective, this is how attachment deepens rather than destabilizes. Attachment formed through anxiety creates dependency. Attachment formed through safety and desire creates connection with autonomy intact. That's the difference between craving someone and choosing them. Right before intimacy, these dynamics are amplified. Small cues, tone of voice, pacing, willingness to pause, communicate volumes. When someone senses that they can stop without punishment, slow down without disappointment, or proceed without pressure, trust grows instantly. And when desire is still clearly present, that trust doesn't dilute attraction, it sharpens it. This is why people often say they can't explain why certain experiences stayed with them. It's not always conscious. The nervous system recognized coherence. The psyche recognized meaning. The body responded, but it wasn't leading alone. If you want to create moments that echo, you have to resist the urge to manufacture intensity. Intensity can be faked. Safety can't. Desire can be signaled. Safety must be embodied. When both are real, the moment carries a different weight. And that weight changes how people remember you. Not as someone exciting but unsafe, or kind but forgettable, but as someone who made them feel whole in the moment. That's not accidental. It's the result of emotional maturity, of knowing how to hold space without controlling it, and how to want without consuming. So the reflection, her. E is simple but not easy. Are you creating connection through pressure, or through presence that makes desire feel safe? Because when someone feels both protected and wanted at the same time, they don't just experience intimacy, they remember it. And people don't forget the moments where they felt free to be fully themselves and fully desired at once. Once presence is established, and once safety and desire are allowed to coexist, something counterintuitive becomes possible: restraint. And this is where most people lose their footing, because restraint is often confused with hesitation, or worse, with disinterest. But psychologically, conscious restraint is neither of those. It's a signal of control, awareness, and intention. And right before intimacy, it can be far more powerful than escalation. We live in a culture that equates momentum with value. Faster means better. Immediate means confident. But human psychology doesn't work that way. The nervous system needs time to register meaning. When everything moves too quickly, the experience becomes compressed. It's over before it has a chance to land. Restraint stretches time. It gives the moment dimensionality. Doing less when it's deliberate creates space, and space is where anticipation lives. Anticipation isn't just excitement, it's cognitive engagement. The mind leans forward, attention sharpens, the person becomes more present, not less. This is why pauses in music matter. Without silence, sound loses its impact. Right before intimacy, restraint signals that the moment isn't being driven by impulse alone. It communicates choice. And choice is deeply attractive because it implies agency. When someone doesn't rush, it suggests they are not controlled by urgency or need. That steadiness is grounding to witness. Psychologically, restraint activates curiosity. When the expected next step is delayed, the brain fills the gap with imagination. And imagination is more powerful than direct stimulation. What the mind anticipates often carries more weight than what the body immediately experiences. This is why people replay certain moments internally long after they're over, not because of what happened, but because of what almost happened. Restraint also protects meaning. When intimacy unfolds too easily, it can feel interchangeable, not because it lacked enjoyment, but because it lacked distinction. Distinction requires contrast. Slowing down where speed is expected creates that contrast. It tells the nervous system, this moment is different. Pay attention. There's also an ethical dimension to restraint that often goes unspoken. Restraint communicates respect for the moment and for the other person. It says, I'm aware of what this means, and I'm not going to treat it casually. That awareness changes the emotional tone instantly. Casual moments are quickly forgotten. Considered moments stay. Importantly, restraint isn't about withholding as a tactic. It's not manipulation. It's not playing hard to get. Those strategies are driven by insecurity. Conscious restraint comes from internal fullness, not lack. It comes from someone who isn't trying to extract validation from the moment, but is instead allowing the moment to unfold naturally. From a philosophical perspective, restraint reflects self-governance, the ability to pause instead of react, to choose instead of compulsively pursue. That capacity is a marker of maturity. And maturity is attractive because it signals safety, predictability, and depth, all without dulling desire. This matters especially in intimate contexts because intimacy heightens vulnerability. When vulnerability meets impulsivity, people can feel exposed in a way that later produces discomfort or regret. When vulnerability meets restraint, it feels held. The experience integrates rather than fractures. Restraint also shifts the power dynamic in a subtle but important way, not by dominating the situation, but by stabilizing it. The person who can slow things down without losing connection is the person who is least anxious about the outcome. And the least anxious person sets the emotional temperature. That emotional temperature determines whether the moment feels rushed or intentional, whether it feels like something that happened to you or something you actively participated in. Participation is what creates ownership. Ownership is what creates memory. There's a common misconception that restraint kills momentum. In reality, it refines it. It channels energy rather than dispersing it. Think of it as pressure building behind a valve. The pressure doesn't disappear, it concentrates. And concentration makes impact inevitable. Restraint also communicates boundaries, and boundaries are not obstacles to intimacy. They are what make intimacy safe. When someone demonstrates that they can pause, that they're attentive to timing and readiness, it reassures the other person that they're not being carried by a force they can't stop. That reassurance allows deeper surrender, not because control was taken, but because it wasn't abused. This is where restraint intersects with trust. Trust grows when people feel that their internal signals matter, that hesitation will be respected, that enthusiasm won't be exploited. Restraint proves that sensitivity exists beneath desire, and sensitivity deepens desire rather than weakening it. There's also a temporal imprint created by restraint. Moments that unfold slowly feel longer in memory. The brain encodes them with more detail, more emotional nuance, more context. That's why certain brief moments feel expansive in retrospect, while longer experiences blur together. In contrast, rushed intimacy often feels disconnected afterward. Not because something went wrong, but because nothing had time to register fully. The nervous system needs pauses to integrate experience. Without integration, the moment passes through without leaving much trace. Restraint also requires tolerance for uncertainty. Pausing means not knowing exactly what will happen next. That uncertainty can be uncomfortable, especially for people who rely on momentum to manage anxiety. But learning to tolerate uncertainty is a form of strength. And strength that isn't aggressive is deeply compelling. This tolerance communicates confidence. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet kind that doesn't need to prove itself. Quiet confidence invites others to relax, and relaxation is what allows people to feel deeply rather than defensively. There's something else happening here that's side amiss. Restraint gives the moment dignity. It elevates it from something reactive to something chosen. That elevation changes how people talk about it later, even internally. It becomes a reference point rather than a blur. From a long-term perspective, restraint protects connection. It reduces the likelihood of emotional whiplash, the feeling of being pulled forward too quickly and then dropped. When experiences are paced well, people feel respected both during and after. That respect shapes how they relate to you going forward. It's also worth noting that restraint isn't static. It's responsive. It listens, it adjusts. It's aware of the other person's cues without being controlled by them. That responsiveness creates a sense of attunement, of being met rather than managed. Attunement is one of the strongest predictors of emotional bonding. When someone feels attuned to, they feel known, and being known without being rushed is rare. Rare experiences are valued experiences. Right before intimacy, restraint turns the moment into a threshold rather than a slide. A threshold requires acknowledgement. Crossing it feels significant. Sliding into something feels accidental. People remember thresholds. This is why restraint doesn't weaken desire. It sharpens it. It tells the story that this moment matters enough not to be consumed mindlessly. That story gets stored alongside the sensation itself. And stories last longer than sensations. So if presence is about being fully there, and safety with desire is about how the moment feels, restraint is about how the moment unfolds. It's the pacing that allows everything else to land. And the reflection here is this: are you rushing toward experience, or are you allowing experience to deepen before you move forward? Because the moments that change people aren't the ones that happen fastest, they're the ones that were given time. To become real. What you slow down for reveals what you value. And when you treat intimacy as something worth pacing, you don't just change the moment, you change how it's remembered. If presence sets the foundation and safety paired with desire creates the emotional climate and restraint determines the pacing, then meaning is what gives the moment its echo. Meaning is the difference between something that happens and something that registers. And this is where intimacy either becomes forgettable or formative. Most people don't think in terms of meaning when it comes to intimate moments. They think in terms of chemistry, attraction, timing, but meaning is always being created, whether consciously or not. The question isn't whether a moment will carry meaning. It's what kind of meaning it will carry. Will it reinforce a sense of worth or leave something hollow behind? Meaning emerges from intention, not intention as in planning every step, but intention as an awareness of significance. When someone treats a moment as if it matters, it begins to matter. When they treat it as casual, even unintentionally, it becomes disposable. Human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to this distinction. Right before intimacy, people are especially receptive to meaning because identity is subtly involved. Intimacy isn't just about bodies. It's about what the experience says about who we are to each other. Am I someone chosen or merely available? Am I valued or simply convenient? Those questions may not be verbalized, but they're felt. This is why the framing of a moment matters so deeply. Framing doesn't require words. It's communicated through tone, timing, and attention. When a moment is approached with care, it signals that it's not interchangeable with any other. That signal lodges itself in memory. From a psychological standpoint, memory isn't a neutral recording a vice. Memory prioritizes emotionally significant experiences, especially those tied to self-concept. Moments that affirm or challenge how we see ourselves are remembered more vividly. When intimacy is infused with meaning, it becomes a reference point. It shapes future expectations, desires, and boundaries. Meaning also stabilizes emotion. Without meaning, intense experiences can feel disorienting afterward. People may feel close in the moment and disconnected later. That disconnect happens because the experience wasn't integrated into a coherent narrative. It happened, but it didn't belong anywhere. When meaning is present, the experience has a place to land. It becomes part of a story that makes sense. And humans are storytelling creatures. We understand ourselves through narrative. Intimacy that carries meaning reinforces a narrative of connection rather than fragmentation. This is particularly important because intimacy has consequences, whether we acknowledge them or not. It changes how people relate to each other afterward. It alters emotional proximity. Meaning provides a container for those changes. Without it, people are left managing emotional fallout without context. There's also a philosophical dimension here. Meaning implies responsibility. To treat a moment as meaningful is to recognize its impact. That recognition changes behavior. It introduces care, attentiveness, and restraint, not because of rules, but because of respect. Respect is central to lasting impact. Not respect in the sense of admiration, but respect in the sense of recognizing the other person as a whole subject, not just a source of experience. When someone feels respected in intimacy, they feel intact afterward. When they don't, something subtle erodes. Meaning is also what transforms desire from consumption into connection. Without meaning, desire seeks satisfaction. With meaning, desire seeks participation. Participation implies mutuality. Mutuality creates resonance. Resonance is what people feel long after the moment has passed. This is why some experiences feel heavy in hindsight, even if they were pleasant at the time. They lacked meaning, and the psyche struggles with that absence. Other experiences feel light but substantial, even if they were quiet. They carried meaning, and meaning integrates. Right before intimacy, meaning is shaped by how the moment is acknowledged. Is there a sense of crossing into something deliberate, or does it feel like sliding into something unexamined? Crossing implies choice. Sliding implies drift. People remember choices more than drifts. Choice reinforces agency. When someone feels that intimacy was a choice rather than a default, it affirms their autonomy. That affirmation deepens attachment rather than undermining it. It allows closeness without regret. Meaning also protects against cynicism. Repeated experiences that feel hollow tend to erode trust, not just in others, but in oneself. People start to detach, to numb out, to treat intimacy as transactional. Meaning interrupts that pattern. It restores depth. This is not about moralizing or assigning rules. It's about recognizing psychological reality. Humans cannot engage in intimacy repeatedly without it shaping them. Meaning determines whether that shaping is constructive or corrosive. When intimacy is meaningful, it doesn't have to be dramatic. In fact, it's often quieter. Meaning doesn't shout. It settles. It leaves a sense of coherence. People walk away feeling more themselves, not less. There's also an asymmetry to meaning. that's worth acknowledging. One person may experience a moment as meaningful while the other does not. That asymmetry is painful precisely because meaning matters. It reveals a mismatch in perception and intention. This is why clarity, emotional clarity, not necessarily verbal clarity, is so important. Meaning requires alignment. When two people are oriented toward the moment in similar ways, meaning emerges naturally. When they're not, confusion follows. Importantly, meaning isn't something you impose. It's something you allow by treating the moment with seriousness without heaviness. Seriousness doesn't mean grim. It means attentive. It means aware that what's happening has weight. Weight is what makes experiences linger. Light experiences pass through us. Weighted experiences leave an impression, not a burden, an imprint. From a long-term perspective, meaning is what differentiates attachment from addiction. Attachment grows from significance and trust. Addiction grows from intensity without integration. Meaning is the difference. This is why people often struggle to articulate why certain moments stayed with them. They'll say it felt different. What they mean is that it had meaning. It aligned sensation, emotion, and narrative into something coherent. Right before intimacy, this coherence can be created or lost. A moment of acknowledgement. A pause, a look, a shift in tone can frame the entire experience. That framing tells the psyche how to store it. And once stored, it doesn't just sit there. It influences future behavior. It shapes what someone expects, tolerates, and seeks. Meaning is cumulative. It builds identity over time. This is why treating intimacy casually is never truly casual. It teaches the nervous system that closeness is fleeting and inconsequential. Treating intimacy as meaningful teaches the nervous system that closeness is safe and valuable. Neither lesson is neutral. Meaning also invites responsibility for one's own internal state. To create meaningful moments, one has to be willing to be present, to tolerate vulnerability, to act with intention. That requires self-knowledge. It requires honesty. And honesty is uncomfortable. It removes plausible deniability. It means you can't pretend the moment didn't matter if it did. But that discomfort is the price of depth. And depth is what most people are quietly craving. So when we talk about making a moment echo, we're really talking about making it true. True to the emotional reality of the situation. True to the significance of closeness. True to the impact it will have. When intimacy is true, it doesn't need exaggeration. It doesn't need theatrics. It stands on its own. And because it stands on its own, it stays. The closing reflection is this: meaning isn't added after the fact. It's created in the moment by how seriously you take what you're doing. If you treat intimacy as something that matters, it will matter. And the moments that matter are the ones that shape who we become.